This is a Fiori in kind of a red color with splotches of rust poking through. I got the frame a few years back and it was in tough condition as you can see here, but there was no dents or cracks in the frame. I thought I had a made in Italy frame as the Decals, or at least what I thought you could make out from what was left of the Decals, looked like it was an Italian-made frame and worthy of a restoration. But with some quick research, it turns out Fiori was actually a Norco house brand, with the frames made in Japan during the late 80s and early 90s. So this is where it gets interesting with this frame. The frame sticker indicates the tubing material was Aelle, which was actually a high-quality tubing made by Columbus in Italy, whereas most Fiori frames made in Japan were Tange Infinity tubing. So this would be an indication that this Fiori frame was something a little more special than the typical Fioris of the time. With this in mind, I decided to go ahead with the restoration. Once I had the frame cleaned up, there were a few more clues as to the originality of the frame. RGF, or also known as Garguet Brothers, was stamped on the bottom bracket. RGF is a French brand that doesn't often show up on Italian frames, but does show up on British bikes and French bikes, of course. So how is it that this Fiori frame was made with Aelle tubing and a French-made RGF bottom bracket? Well, it becomes even more interesting as the rear drops are Gipiemme, which were also made in Italy. So with this in mind, I searched Fiori frame with Aelle tubing, RGF bottom bracket, and Gipiemme drops. And most likely this frame was the Fiori Amalfi model from 1985 or 1986, with a complete Cannondale Victory group set, which would have been a good quality racing bike of the time. The frame could have also been a Fiori Firenze 1987 model, made in Italy, but with a Gipiemme Chrono Sprint group set, as the Firenze model also showed up in my searches. I was thinking of color matching the frame to the original red color, but had some diamond black metallic with violet pearl hyper highlights paint left over from my Cannondale 900 build, and decided to go with that same color. I love the way the light dances and reflects off the diamond black metallic and violet pearl color. So I was on the fence as to what model I would go with for the frame, as there really wasn't anything left of the original model decal. When I searched for replacement decals, I found a nice set of Fiori decals from Cyclomondo Decals, and I'll leave a link in the description for Cyclomondo's website. Great quality decals for vintage bikes and awesome service, so highly recommend Cyclomondo Decals. Well, I think the paint and decals turned out great. So I was thinking of going with a Campanolo or Gipiemme group set for the build, but I didn't have any of those parts in my bins. But I did have a full group set from about the same time period as the frame, which included 700C Ambrosio made in Italy wheels with Suzue hubs, a Sugino GT crankset, Weinmann Type 730 brakes, and Suntour derailleurs, which I thought would all work nice for this build. So I'm going to go with the wheels, the crankset, and derailleurs, but decided to go with a set of Shimano 105 brakes from 1990, as the reach on the Weinmann brakes would not give me the required clearance, and besides, I really like Shimano 105 components. With the group set ready, I'll start installing the bottom bracket. The French RGF bottom bracket means I'll need a right-hand thread cup for the drive side, which is reverse of what you commonly see on modern bikes and screws in righty-tighty. Not sure why the French thought right-hand threading for the right side of the bike was a good idea, as right-hand threads are prone to loosening while pedaling. The concept didn't last long, and I'll use Loctite to solve the problem. With the right side cup installed, I'll grease up the bottom bracket bearings and adjust the lock ring so the axle spins freely and there's no play in the axle. and then I'll torque everything down. Next, I'll move on to installing the fork and headset. I have a nice set of chrome high tensile steel forks from my parts bin, which I think will work great for this build. I'll grease up the headset bearings with a high quality waterproof marine grease and adjust the lock ring so the fork turns freely so there isn't any play in the fork. As I mentioned before, I have a nice set of 700C Ambrosio made in Italy wheels for the build, and will install a new set of 700 by 28C 100 PSI tires. Next, I'll grease up the wedge on the SR stem with a high quality marine grease to ensure it doesn't get stuck in the future. With the stem and handlebars installed, I'll move on to installing the Sugino cranks. The friction shifters and derailleurs will come next. So I've got the chain installed and I'm pretty happy with how things look. But I'm not happy with the friction shifters I was planning to use, as the shifter mounting shafts on the frame are too short for the shifter to hold the friction properly. So I'll use a set of Shimano 105 shifters from my parts bin, which I think will work nicely. I've got the shifters wired up, and it's interesting to note how the cable attaches to the Suntour rear derailleur. It's not the typical cinch bolt commonly used. Rather, the gear cable passes through the body of the derailleur, threads through a clamping plate, and then out through a small slot in the front of the derailleur. Anyway, I'm happy with how things are shifting, and we'll move on to installing the brakes. As I mentioned, I'll be using a set of Shimano BR 1055s from 1990 that will require short pull levers, providing a crisp feel and strong braking power. Typically, brake handle hoods are cracked and need replacing. I found that Cane Creek makes a pretty good fitting brake hood replacement, and I have a set that will work nicely for this build. With the new hoods installed on the levers, they slide onto the handlebars and then usually tighten down with a flat blade screwdriver, or in my case, a number 5 hex wrench. With the lever in close to final position, I use a straight edge to line up the bottom of the bars with the bottom of the levers. The front brake comes next and is easy to install by inserting the brake caliper through the frame, and then the number 5 hex nut tightens down from the back side while making sure the arms are centered side to side. And then I'll do the same with the back brake. To wire up the brakes, I'll size up the housing and leave enough slack so the front loop does not interfere with the handlebar grip positions. I'll use a small penny nail to ensure the brake cable will move freely through the end of the housing. And again, I'll leave a nice loop matching the right side. I'll use a road bike brake cable style where the cable end threads through the pivot slot in the brake handle. And then I'll thread the cable through the housing and clamp it down. So I'm pretty happy with the braking, so I'll move on to installing the seat post. I like to use lots of high quality marine grease on the post to ensure it doesn't get stuck in the future. The saddle is next, and then I'll move on to installing the handlebar wrap. I start the wrapping process by installing a small piece of the wrap over the brake lever clamp. I leave enough overlap so the tape can be tucked into the ends of the handlebars securely. And then I wrap in an outwardly direction so the tape doesn't loosen off when riding. When I get to the handle, I change direction of the wrap to again counter the natural tendency of gripping the handlebars and ensuring the wrap doesn't loosen off. With the wrapping done, I'll use a plug which can be tightened down, holding the bar tape securely in position to finish things off. Well, I think this build turned out pretty good. And knowing that this bike was not your typical Norco house brand Fiori, I think it's cool to have a bike with a bit of mystery to it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.